Chapter 5, from 1803 to 1824, Section 3. On the demise of Colonel Collins, the government devolved on Lieutenant Edward Lord until the arrival of Captain Murray of the 73rd Regiment. The Governor-in-Chief visited Van Diemen's Land during Captain Murray's administration. This auspicious event was the subject of great exultation. Macquarie was received with all possible formality and tokens of gladness. A salute from a battery of no great power, an illumination in the small windows of the scattered cottages, and addresses delivered by delegates not bound to declare the number of their constituents. Nothing remarkable is remembered of this visit, except that Macquarie traced the future city. He complained of the utter neglect of right lines in the erection of dwellings, which advanced or retreated according to the whim of the builder. The centre of the projected town he called St. George's Square. In this he intended to rear a church and town hall, and the quarters of the main guard. The open space he designed for a market. The streets which intersect each other he called by the names which still distinguish them. Liverpool Street after the minister of that name, Macquarie Street after himself, Elizabeth Street in honour of his lady, Argyle Street of their native country, and Murray Street in compliment to the officer in command. The plan sketched by Macquarie has not been absolutely followed, nor has it been improved. He ordered the erection of a signal staff on Mount Nelson, named after the vessel which brought him to port, and conveyed him safely to Port Jackson. The settlers on the Derwent expressed a fervent admiration of his devotedness in thus venturing to face the dangers of the visit, especially accompanied by his consort, so they distinguished Mrs. Macquarie. The governor merited their gratitude, for his hand was liberal. In February 1812, Colonel Giles became acting lieutenant governor and remained until the arrival of Colonel Davy. Colonel Giles devoted great attention to agricultural pursuits and first formed at Risdon a considerable farming establishment. Ordered to India with the troops under his command, he forwarded his youthful sons to the Cape of Good Hope, thence to be conveyed to England. The colonists heard soon after with deep commiseration that the vessel in which they re-embarked was lost. Colonel Davy, the second governor of Van Diemen's Land, arrived on the 4th of February, 1813. His manner of entrance indicated the peculiarity of his character. For the weather being warm, he carried his coat on his arm and announced himself at the house where he sought temporary accommodations. Nor did his subsequent administration differ from its unceremonious beginning. He took pleasure in practical jokes and rough humour. His countenance was strongly marked, and by a peculiar motion of the scalp, he delighted to throw his forehead into comical contortions. He shared in common a taste for spirituous liquors and was not unwilling to participate wherever he was welcome as a guest. On what principle he was selected to conduct the affairs of a remote and reformatory settlement, it would be useless to conjecture. As a Marine, he had been present in many important actions, among the rest, at the Battle of Trafalgar. His intended departure from England he concealed from his family, by whom it was discovered accidentally. They reached the vessel by extraordinary exertions, and in neglect of all the usual preparations for the voyage. The ship which conveyed his luggage was taken by the Americans. During the war for him, a fortunate loss indemnified by the largest grant ever conferred in this island, 3,000 acres, for it was not pretended that the captors could have made an extensive prize. Mrs. Davy, a lady of a meek and uncomplaining spirit, is spoken of with respect, and the governor himself with kindness, for under a rough exterior was concealed a generous disposition. During Davy's government, 200 female prisoners were brought down from Sydney in the brig Kangaroo. Proclamation was made, and the settlers were invited to receive them. There was little delicacy of choice. They landed and vanished, and some carried into the bush, changed their destination before they reached their homes. Yet such is the power of social affections, several of these unions yielded all the ordinary consolations of domestic life. The conveniences of civilization were not wholly neglected. The ports were opened for general commerce in June 1813. Houses of trade were established, and Messrs. Kemp and Gatehouse, Messrs. E. Lord, and J. H. Rebay supplied the colony with English goods. The most necessary articles had often been wanting. The settlers purchased even the clothing of the prisoners, as preferable to the skins of animals by which they were often clad. The resources of the colony were developed. Mr. Birch, an enterprising merchant, fitted out a vessel to survey the western coasts in 1816, and Captain Kelly discovered Macquarie Harbour and Port Davey. Captain Florence found a new species of pine, very highly valued by artificers. Mr. Birch was rewarded with 1 year's monopoly of the trade he had opened. The whale fishery was considerably enlarged. Corn was exported, the plough introduced and gradually superseded the hoe, a mill erected, and in February 1817 the foundation of St. David's Church was laid. Passage boats connected the banks of the Derwent. A civil court for the recovery of debts not exceeding £50 was established. A newspaper was a second time attempted in 1814 without success, when the commercial strength of the community was indicated by 2 or 3 advertisements, was at length published under better auspices. On the 1st June 1816, Mr. Andrew Bent issued the first number of the Hobart Town Gazette and Southern Reporter, and thus brought into permanent action an agency which has promoted as well as recorded the advancement of the community. Nor can it be recollected without regret that he, an undoubted benefactor of the colony, is left to an indigent old age, cut off from the prosperity to which his early labours contributed. The welfare of Van Diemen's Land was greatly retarded by the number, daring and prolonged depredations of the bushrangers. In some districts, the inhabitants offered a sanctuary to criminals and, as their scouts, gave notice of the approach of danger, while in others the settlers were driven before them. To check their ravages, Colonel Davy declared the whole colony under martial law. He punished with flogging persons, whether free or bond, who quitted their houses by night. Several offenders were captured and suffered death. The inhabitants, to the number of 600, expressed their approval of this stretch of power, but it was promptly disallowed by the Governor-in-Chief. On many previous occasions the same course had been pursued. To constitutional law, the Lieutenant Governor was both indifferent and a stranger. Colonel Davy, when he relinquished his office, remained for some time as a settler. He was not, however, successful. He returned to England, where he died on the 2nd of May, 1823. His contemporaries speak of his character in terms of eulogy. The modern colonist will remember that the tastes of society have since that period been modified, even in Great Britain, and that character can never be fairly judged when separated from the circumstances in which it is developed. Then, the town was a mere camp. The etiquette of office, necessary when a community is advanced, would be folly in its infancy. End of Chapter 5 being Chapter 2, from 1803 to 1824, Section 3.